Thanks a lot, and thanks also to the organizers for giving us the opportunity to present this paper here in this conference. The paper deals with the establishment of national fiscal councils following the reform of the European economic governance, and we are going to look particularly at the relationship between fiscal councils and national parliaments. I will start with an overview of the new European rules concerning fiscal councils, since the setting up of this institution has become compulsory for the member states. And then Elena will deal with a comparative analysis of 3 case studies we have selected, that of Belgium, Germany, and the UK. And also, she will deal with the ongoing process of establishment of the Fiscal Council in Italy after the constitutional reform of 2012. Actually, fiscal councils pre-exist to the reform of the European economic governance. The first examples of fiscal councils date back to the 70s, and there are also a few examples of fiscal councils established in the 50s and in the 60s. Their main aim is to maintain sound public accounts, and their establishment was also supported by the OECD, by the International Monetary Fund, and more recently by the European Commission. However, the turning point for the establishment of fiscal councils was the reform of the European economic governance, because their establishment has become compulsory, as I said before. Therefore, member states, particularly those of the Eurozone, are obliged to setting up technical and independent bodies independent from the fiscal authorities for ensuring the compliance with EU and national fiscal rules following the financial crisis. However, until February 2012, thus before the signature of the Fiscal Compact, only 10 member states of the EU already had a fiscal council established. The new framework is becoming more and more demanding for the member states in terms of institutional requirements for the setting up of these institutions, and is also a very complex legal framework composed of the Directive 2011-85, which is part of the six-pack, the Fiscal Compact, so the Treaty on the Stability, Coordination and Governance, Article 3.2, a communication from the Commission published in June 2012 on the common principles for the implementation of the correction mechanisms, and the last development is that of the draft regulation on commons provision for monitoring and assessing the draft budgetary plans, which is part of the so-called two-pack. Scholars to date have mainly focused on the financial impact of the establishment of fiscal councils and on their independence, regardless of the relationship between the government and fiscal council on the one hand, and between parliament and fiscal councils on the other hand. In other terms, scholars consider the independence of fiscal councils from the fiscal authorities, regardless of whether they enjoy a special relationship with the parliament or with the executive branch. However, we think that fiscal councils are also important for improving the democratic legitimacy of financial and budgetary decisions by strengthening the position of parliaments, which has been particularly affected after the reform of the European economic governance. So we have tried to address 2 main research questions. The first deals with the contribution, with the possible contribution of fiscal councils to the enhancement of the position of parliaments in the framework of the European economic governance, focusing especially on the relationship between fiscal councils, parliaments, and the executive branch. And secondly, we have tried to look also at how the special relationship between fiscal councils and national parliament and the existence of strong ties between the two can affect also the independence and effective functioning of fiscal councils. And we have selected three case studies, Belgium, Germany, and the UK, depending on the specific features of the fiscal councils in these three member states. Because, for instance, in Germany, the fiscal council is established within the executive branch and is, even though acting independently, it has few powers and not direct connection with the Bundestag. The case of Belgium also is particularly interesting because it has two fiscal councils actually, and one of them is also entitled to coordinate the implementation of fiscal rules amongst the different levels of government, as well as it is entitled to issue policy recommendations to fiscal authorities. And the case of the UK is also particularly interesting because even though it was established quite recently in 2010, the fiscal councils enjoy strong ties with the House of Commons. First of all, I would like to look at the powers conferred by the new European rules to the fiscal councils. We start from the directive 2011-85, which just entitled fiscal councils to provide independent analysis to fiscal authorities. But then Article 3 of the Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance has made fiscal councils responsible for monitoring the compliance with the balanced budget clause, preferably established in the Constitution, and also in monitoring the compliance with the convergence towards the country-specific medium-term objective. Moreover, according to the Fiscal Compact, it is up to the European Commission to establish common principles for the setting up of fiscal councils, and since they are entitled to monitor the compliance and the implementation, with the connection mechanism, fiscal councils have to be established respecting the existing prerogatives of national parliaments. But actually it's not completely clear who is going to check and to control that the powers of the national parliaments will not be affected by the establishment and by the functioning of the fiscal councils. If this prerogative will be checked by national courts, for instance, if fiscal councils will be recognized at constitutional level, or whether the Court of Justice could be entitled to accomplish such scrutiny in the framework of Article 8 of the Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance, because fiscal councils are provided by Article 3.2 of the Fiscal Compact, and according to Article 8 of the Fiscal Compact, the Court of Justice may be called to, may be asked to review the compliance by the member state of this, with this Article 3.2. In this framework, also the establishment of fiscal councils can be considered. 2 minutes more. Okay. Then another interesting, I can say, new provision about fiscal councils came from Principle 7 of the communication from the Commission that entitled fiscal councils also to issue binding recommendations for fiscal authorities, binding in the sense that in case of deviation from these recommendations, fiscal authorities and especially the executive have to justify publicly why they decide to take such conduct. Of course, this would entail, on the one hand, the risk of a politicization of fiscal councils, because issuing policy recommendation, they will be involved in the political debate. And on the other hand, this provision could create some problems in terms of the relationship between technical body and democratic body, putting further constraints on the activity of national parliaments in taking financial and budgetary decisions. Finally, the draft regulation of the two-pack on draft budgetary plans also entitles fiscal councils to accomplish the ex-post control, of the respect of the fiscal rules. this could be problematic in terms of the relationship between fiscal councils and existing courts of auditors where they have been established in some member states. However, no reference has been made to the powers of fiscal councils to provide macroeconomic forecasts for, to the national fiscal authorities. I will skip this part because Elena we will go into consider particularly the problem of the independence of fiscal councils with regard to the relationship between parliament and executive. So I will finish by considering the existing overview of fiscal councils in the EU member state. As for the powers, fiscal councils nowadays only enjoy advisory powers, and they have the duty to inform the fiscal authorities about the results of their monitoring activity. There are only 2 examples of fiscal councils, namely in Belgium and in Sweden, that also adopt policy recommendations. Therefore, if the Principle 7 of the communication will be implemented, the existing fiscal councils should be reformed with this regard. And finally, as for the institutional features, the overall majority of the existing fiscal councils in the European member state are actually government-centered. I mean that they are established within the executive branch. The only exception is that of Italy, which provided in the new constitutional law for the establishment of this institution within the parliament, thus mirroring the model of the Congressional Budget Office in the US. There are some elements, however, that run in favor for establishing a special relationship between fiscal councils and parliaments in the EU. First of all, the general framework provided by the Treaty of Lisbon, according to which national parliaments contribute actively to the functioning of the European Union, as confirmed also by the position of some constitutional courts. Secondly, in the new Euro-national budgetary procedures, a strong link between fiscal councils and parliaments could improve the democratic legitimacy of these procedures by providing parliaments with further informative tools for taking their decisions. And finally, there are also the provision of the fiscal compact, of the communication from the Commission, and of the European Parliament's amendment to the draft regulation of the two-pack, which, when they refer to the fiscal councils, always stress the condition of their accountability to the Parliament and the respect of the current prerogatives of Parliament.
So I'm afraid you've only got 7 minutes now because she's taken your time. Okay, so before entering the analysis of national cases, let me spend a few more words on the so-called independence factor. Why do we believe that it is not so obvious that fiscal council should be independent from parliament? Because it is obvious that they should be independent from the government, because it is the government the one who is under trial, but not independent from parliament. And there are 2 categories of reasons for supporting this idea. The first is a category of functional reasons, because parliament do not always share a large amount of power in the budgetary decision-making process. In the countries based on the Westminster model, the parliament just ratifies decisions, proposals of the government. And structural reasons are related to the fact that the interaction with parliaments enables fiscal council to interact with a variety of positions, the positions of the majority and the positions of the opposition. Therefore, the independence is not so at risk when relating to parliaments. And as Cristina was mentioning before, we analyzed 3 different national cases, UK, Belgium, and Germany. And when comparing these cases, we try to look at 2 different levels of analysis. The first level of analysis is that of the relationship between the Fiscal Council and the Parliament. And in particular, we try to represent this interaction in 4 different elements, factors: the role of the Parliament in the Council's appointing procedures, the Fiscal Council's participation at parliamentary decision-making processes. In other terms, if the Council interacts in the law-making process, if its reports are submitted and discussed by Parliament, and if this relationship is a direct one, which is the role of the Parliament in the financement of the Council, and which is the role of the Parliament in making the Council accountable. This first level of analysis was accompanied by a second level of analysis, which was referred to the role of the Parliament in the budgetary decision-making process. Here we looked at what the Parliament does when approving the budget and when controlling the budget in its execution. So the question that you may pose is, why combining these two levels of analysis? And the answer is quite simple. It's because we expected those parliaments we were very strong in the ex post and the ex ante scrutiny of budget to be more willing to interact with fiscal councils. In other terms, we could expect fiscal councils to have a better relationship with those parliaments who are very strong in the scrutiny function. And the results of our comparative analysis are summarized in this. I won't present it all, I promise, but it's just to say that here we have three different levels of parliamentary scrutiny of budget. Very strong in United Kingdom, medium in Germany, and low up to medium in Belgium. In the United Kingdom, where we have an intense parliamentary scrutiny, we find a fiscal council, the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is both government and parliamentary centered. So the interaction here is strong in between the fiscal council and the parliament, in the appointment procedures, in the accountability rules, in the financement, and so on. Well, this is not the case in Belgium and in Germany, where the fact that the parliament is not so strong in the parliamentary scrutiny gives also, makes it more difficult to establish a strong interaction with the fiscal council. Also because here we have two very strongly government-centered fiscal councils. In the case of Germany, it is quite obvious that the Council of Economic Experts, which was set up in the 60s, is completely referred to the government, so no interaction at all with the parliament. While in the case of Belgium, we have a kind of pluralism, institutional pluralism, which is offered by the fact that these two fiscal councils interact with different territorial levels, so with governments of both the federation and the regions. I won't spend too much words on the Italian ongoing debate. I would just like to mention the Constitutional Law number 1/2012, which in Italy introduced the rule of the budgetary balance and at the same time provided for the creation of an independent fiscal body. This fiscal council has not yet been created because the parliament is still discussing on how to structure this body, but looking at the parliamentary debates and looking at the content of the constitutional law, we can say that this council will be strongly parliamentary centered. So it will find in the two chambers its own institutional interlocutor, its main institutional interlocutor, and it will serve as a research unit for the parliament. So the question is, will this model work due to the fact that in Italy the parliament almost does not execute the parliamentary, the control function in the budgetary process, because the Italian parliament does intervene in the decision-making process, in approving the budget, but it's not so strong in controlling its execution. So it's a question that we may raise. And we will come to some conclusions, which are not really conclusions, but we merely listed a number of challenges that fiscal councils will have to face. And the first challenge has to deal with time constraints in establishing new institutions and adapting existing ones. They will probably have 12 months starting from the 1st of January 2013. And it was easy to respect this deadline. The second challenge deals with the relationship between fiscal councils and existing institutions, as Cristina was mentioning before, which will build their interaction in between fiscal councils and the courts of editors already established at national level, and which will be the interaction with the Constitutional Court. At European level, fiscal councils tend to act as watchdogs, and the role of watchdog at the European level is carried out by the Commission, so which interaction between national fiscal councils and the European Commission. And will the European Court of Justice be entitled to review the correct implementation of EU requirements concerning fiscal councils? So they are all open questions. The third challenge deals with the adaptation of existing national councils to the increasingly demanding requirements established at European Union level. In particular, the European Union requires member states to endow fiscal councils with the power to issue policy recommendations which are partially binding for their governments, for the fiscal authorities, which have to justify publicly deviation from them. And this will force many member states to change completely the nature of the interaction between government and fiscal councils. The fourth challenge, the development of a solid relationship between parliaments and fiscal councils, and this will be a very difficult task to pursue for those very strongly government-centered fiscal councils such as the German one. Because European Union requires parliaments, fiscal councils to be held accountable in face of parliaments. And the fifth and last challenge, which is probably one of the most interesting one, is the one related to the independence of these bodies. Because fiscal councils are always supposed to find an equilibrium between, she encouraged these ideas between acting in full independence and merely legitimizing government's plan. So an ideal fiscal council is supposed to steer in the middle course in between these two opposites, and there's no golden rule which could tell a fiscal council how to find its way. But probably our thesis is that strengthening the interaction with Parliament could help these bodies to find this middle course. And this will also lead us to completely overcome the traditional distinction between government and parliament-centered fiscal councils. Probably the fiscal councils which will be set up in the European Union will need to develop this strong interaction with parliaments. And this will also be a valuable purpose, valuable objective also for representative assemblies. Thank you very much.